So we are trying to get an overview of the most important canonical literature of Hindu Vedantic tradition, and this is also considered to be the oldest and the first human document on philosophy and spirituality, Rigveda Samhita. So many of you must have heard Rigveda. You all know there are 4 Vedas altogether: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda. Rigveda occupies a very unique place because it is the largest of the 4 Vedas. That is one reason. Secondly, the discovery of Rigveda was a great turning point in the history of Western philosophy, Western religious thought, and also Western philology, because the language of Rigveda was a great revolution in modern linguistics. I will talk about this later. Those of you who are more interested in this subject can read some of these well-known books in English, mostly the works of Max Muller, who translated Rigveda, who got edited all these Vedas, and he made important contribution to modern linguistics and philology, especially comparative philology. So that is a different subject, but those of you who are interested can read some of these books. I can name a few important books in English. One is MacDonald Vedic Reader. That is one. Then, of course, Max Muller is the most important contributor to Vedic studies in Western intellectual tradition. Rigveda Samhita, that's the name of this book, Samhita. So you know there are 4 Vedas, and each of these Vedas has got 4 sections: Samhita, Brahmanam, Aranyakam, Upanishad. Samhita is the most important one because it be the largest body of this Vedic literature. Each section, it contains hymns, prayers addressed to different deities, different gods and goddesses in Vedic tradition. Who are these goddesses? Those of you may know Vishnu, Soma, Agni, Indra, Vayu, Mitra. All some of these are the names of these gods and goddesses. The early Indians, the Aryan sages. Now remember, when we use the word Aryan, I want to draw your attention to this point. It's a very important thing. The word Arya is a Sanskrit word which becomes anglicized Aryan. It's really very corrupt anglicization example, a very interesting example of how a word can completely lose its meaning. The word Arya in Sanskrit means any cultured, refined, broad-minded, spiritually evolved person with a strong spiritual, cultural lineage. That is the real meaning of the word Arya. So the oldest of, some of the oldest of Sanskrit dictionaries, which are in metrical form, in verses, will define Arya: Mahakula Kulinarya Sadbhya Sajjana Satavaka. This is a definition, more like, reads like thesaurus, not like dictionary. But it's all in metrical forms, verse. Who is an Arya? Arya is a person. Mahakula means somebody who belongs to an ancient lineage. Sajjana, Sabhya means those who are refined, cultured, of a sattvic temperament, culturally, spiritually, an evolved person. who is broad-minded. So it is to be an Aryan, you should be a spiritually evolved person. That word was hijacked and given a very, very unfortunate connotation and meaning right from 19th century onwards up to the late, some of the early decades of 20th century. I'm not going into those details. So remember, in the Vedic culture, the word Arya means somebody, well, you can say to be, Buddha was an Arya. In fact, in the Buddhist Pali canonical literature, Arja is used, which means Arya. So Buddha was called an Arya, means a refined person, a culturally, spiritually evolved person. Now, these ancient Aryan sages, they believed in different kinds of gods and goddesses. So you find in Vedic literature, Vedic literature, different levels of our understanding, human understanding of the absolute reality or God. So you find pantheism, polytheism, pantheism, monotheism, monism, and absolute idealism. So 6-7 stages of evolution in Godhead. Remember, this analysis was made by Max Muller. So that also you should remember. Mostly Western Indologists try to give an analysis of the evolution of Godhead as they found in Vedic literature, which of course was an attempt to linguistically and philologically trying to understand the meaning of Vedic statements. This is not part of India's received Vedic interpretation. And the ancient traditional Vedic scholars of India may not support the view that there is a gradual evolution. But then this is a very wonderful methodology employed by Western Indologists to understand the growth of the concept, the evolution of Godhead in Vedic literature. So let's say pantheism, equating nature with God. So the beauty, the grandeur, the majesty, and the mystery of rivers and mountains and valleys and clouds and skies and lightning. See, lightning, it was attributed to Indra. So ocean, waters attributed to Varuna. So air, the mighty storms, these natural forces were attributed to Vayu. Like that, and the fire principle, Agni, so is one of the most important concepts of gods in Vedic tradition, Agni, the fire god. So what I mean to say, the first stage of their evolution of Godhead, you find pantheism, which means equating nature to God. The second stage is pantheism, which means trying to relate a divine principle inherent within the natural phenomena. That is the next stage. Then polytheism. Behind each of these, there is a divine principle guiding, regulating these natural forces. And then there is polytheism, and then monotheism, which means conceiving a supreme deity as the presiding deity of all gods and goddesses. You find the influence of these ideas of Vedic pantheon, you find in the ancient Greek mystery religions and in those religious traditions which prevailed in Europe, which unfortunately are called pagan religions by later Christian missionaries. They called paganism, they called ancient religious traditions of Europe before Christianity became the national religion of Roman Empire in 325 AD, when Constantine, who became a Christian, imposed Christianity on Roman Empire. Before that, there were a number of very wonderful religious concepts. And one unique aspect of these ancient pre-Christian religious traditions which had prevailed in Europe, which had very close affinity with Vedic religion, one unique aspect of these traditions were they were singularly free from fanaticism. Totally free from any kind of fanaticism or intolerance, and total acceptance of other tribes' religious concepts, a part of the pre-Christian religions, especially Greek mystery religions in Europe. And then there was this monism close to Advaita, conceiving God as a transcendental divine principle which is omnipresent, present everywhere, and which is immanent, present in everything, as the indweller. So you find all these different concepts of God in Rigveda Samhita. Rigveda Samhita was subjected to the most exhaustive studies, much more than other Vedas, because a large percentage of Vedic mantras found in Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda are really found in Rigveda itself. So roughly you find almost 1028 to 1060 hymns. Hymns mean long poems which contains several verses. The most profound, perhaps the largest of these hymns contains 190 verses. It was the end of Rigveda Samhita you find. Some of them contain very few verses. They were called suktas. Suktam, suktam, Sanskrit, which means a long hymn which contains many verses, many slokas in Sanskrit verses. So altogether there are around close to 11,000 verses in Rigveda Samhita, which can be divided into roughly around 1060, or maybe 1060, 1050, there are different calculations, hymns, and all these are divided into 10 sections called mandalas. So the whole entire Rigveda Samhita, that's what we are discussing now. We are not discussing Upanishads and Aranyakas and Brahmanas of Rigveda. Rigveda Samhita is the mother of Vedic literature. Though it is essentially a book of hymns, it is the cradle, it is the genesis of everything, and it is considered to be the oldest human document on spirituality and philosophy. So in that Rigveda Samhita you find these different deities. Now to give an example, what did they mean by worshipping different deities? How they evolved in spiritual life. There is one very well-known imagery that is found in Atharva Veda, but it is found in Rigveda Samhita. So you find, this is for scholars, if the same verse is found in all the four Vedas, then it was believed that the original source is Rigveda, because that is the oldest of the four. Dva Suparna Savija Sakhaya Samanam Vriksham Parishusajade Tayor Anya Pippalam Swadati Anasnan Anyu Abhichakasidi. It's an interesting, you find this as being a subject of many discussions and debates and philosophical studies in modern times. Those of you who are interested in reading English books, who are not familiar with Sanskrit, can read Raymond Panikir's Vedic Experience. He was himself a well-known missionary of both Spanish and Indian parentage, who taught in Rome, in Vatican, who was teaching Vedas, who was a well-known figure in the early half of 20th century, maybe a little later, as a great linguist and philosopher who interpreted Vedas, who was familiar with Sanskrit, Raimondo Panikkar. In the name of his book is The Vedic Experience. It has got a Sanskrit title, just a title only, Mantra Manjari, you find. So you find, for example, how they evolved, what's meaning of evolution of the Godhead. According to our own evolution, in direct proportion to our own spiritual evolution, our understanding of God also evolves. At a primitive level, we may believe God is somebody or something that activates this natural phenomena. God is the power behind the fire, the air, the water, the clouds, and so on. Very similar to the views you find in the Zoroastrian religion, the ancient Parsi religion, and in many of the Greek mystery religions also. God is a divine power that activates natural forces. So from that to the idea that God is one divine transcendental principle, going beyond monotheism, going beyond conceiving God as one big man who, after creating this world, sits above, keeping a close eyes on what we are doing, and certainly not a very compromising person. So going even beyond that, the idea that God is one divine principle that is present in all of us, that is present everywhere. So what does it mean? What's the use of one divine principle sitting within our hearts? So the Vedas tell you that you can manifest this divinity within you by living a good life, by being a good man, by practicing prayer, meditation, self-restraint, sense control, by being broad-minded, compassionate and loving, looking upon the whole creation as one spiritual family. Through the practice of these spiritual qualities, the divinity that is within you can come out and manifest and becomes a matter of experience to you. This belief does not deny the idea of worshipping God in a temple or a church, but it only goes beyond it. So that is a one unique aspect of Vedic concept of religion. It doesn't deny your right to worship God the way you want. That is a very unique principle. That means Vedic religion does not reject any view in any tradition. The point is, it only insists that at the highest level, the God whom you worship in your temple or in your church, in your place of worship, that belief, that prayerful attitude of yours to God should express itself in our interaction, in our relationship with our human beings, but also in our interaction with the entire nature. So, in this particular verse that I chanted just now, you find it's an imagery, a tree on which two birds are sitting. The two birds are identical in color, in shape, in size, in all manners. They are completely identical. The difference is one is sitting on the branch above, the other is sitting on the branch below. But there is a difference. The one sitting above, on the branch above, is sitting quiet, composed, contented, tranquil, because it identifies itself with the divine principle present everywhere. The other bird, sitting on the branch below, it is restless. It tries to eat sweet fruits all the time, but it is not possible. Sometimes it gets sweet fruits, sometimes it gets sour fruits. So it becomes happy and unhappy. When we have some bad experience in life, we become unhappy. When we have some pleasant experience in life, we become happy. So, the bird below corresponds to human beings, all of us. Sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are unhappy. But the bird below is a reflection of our own destiny. The bird above is Ishvara, is the divine principle. As the bird ascends towards the higher branch, as it evolves, when it reaches close to the other bird sitting on the branch above, which is sitting quiet and contented and happy, then it understands its identity with the bird above. So what happens? It becomes one with the other one. I mean, both the birds become one. Like that, through our spiritual practice, through practicing spiritual disciplines, prayer, meditation and so on, we will be able to go beyond pain and pleasure. Eating sweet fruits and sour fruits by transcending pain and pleasure, by reaching the higher region through spiritual practices. So, the bird moves upward, ascends the top branch. Similarly, we also should have a spiritual ascent through spiritual disciplines. And when we do that, we can manifest this divinity within us and we will understand our own divine nature. So as I mentioned earlier, this principle, which actually is the root of Advaita, it doesn't deny other levels of spirituality. Just like a PhD professor will not make fun of a small little kid who is going to kindergarten, who is struggling with his alphabet. Oh, you are a fool. Why are you struggling like me? I'm in Harvard, so you should behave like me. A professor will not do that unless he wants to be certified. Similarly, the highest spiritual person doesn't reject any path. So you find a unique verse in the Rig Veda Samhita, which we have inscribed in our old temple in San Francisco. Indram Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Atho Divyasa Suparno Virutman Ekam Satvipra Bhagudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. So the central principle of this verse is Ekam Satvipra Bhagudha Vadanti. What it means is, the reality is one, but sages, inspired sages, call it by different names, give it different definitions in different languages, but the reality is one. So the full verse comes in the first mandala, 164th Sukta you find. Indram Mitram Varunam Agnirahu Atho Divyasa Suparno Gurutman Ekam Sat Vipra Bhagudha Vadanti Agnim Yamam Matarishwanamahu. What it means is, Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, all these are different names. Indra was one deity, Varuna was one deity, Agni. Agni is the deity whose name is mentioned first in the first Rigveda mantra, Agni Mele Purohitam Yajnasya Deva Murticham Hotaram Viratnadhatamam. So Agnim Ile, we propitiate, we pray to Agni. That is the first prayer. So all these deities are different names, different manifestations of the same reality. This is the central message of Rigveda Samhita. So there is an evolution from many to one, from external to internal, from gross to subtle. So those of you find Kasmai Devaya Havisha Vidhema. To what God should we offer our oblations? Ko Dadarsya Prathamam Jayamanam. who realized, who understood the absolute reality, the firstborn. You find many such wonderful ideas in the Rig Veda Samhita, which is the basis, actually the most fundamental basis of interfaith harmony or interspirituality or interfaith dialogue can be found in the Rig Veda Samhita. So, which for the first time in human history proclaimed to the world that the reality is one. Different people, different religions, different cultures, different nationalities, they try to realize this reality according to their own conventions. So there may be differences with regard to socio-cultural conventions, geographical conditions, food habits in different cultures. But the absolute reality is one without a second. It is common for everyone. Now, as I mentioned, Rig Veda Samhita. In the Samhita, as I mentioned, you find a lot of prayers. So, in Rigvedic times, there were not huge temples. So that is something very, very important for us to remember. In the Rig Veda Samhita, which corresponds to the early Vedic age, so to speak, historians have tried to analyze the evolution of Vedic culture into two, the early Vedic age and the later Vedic age. In the early Vedic age, you don't find any mention of temples, images, or external forms of worship as we find today. The construction of huge temples or the ritualistic worship that we find today are evolved much later in Hinduism. So they used to perform different kinds of worship through prayer and meditation. So worship took the form of not putting flowers in an image, but rather doing prayers to the mysterious truth, the mystery behind nature. And they used to they used to put offerings on burning fire. So you find Paschema Sharadashadam, Jivayama Sharadashadam, Sunayama Sharadashadam, Prabhuyama Sharadashadam, Shatamadina, Swayam Sharadashadam, Bhuyascha Sharadashatat. I'm just reading, reciting some of these prayers that they used to recite when they used to put offerings on the burning fire. So they used to burn fires. And this burning fire, which is Agni, the fire, was considered to be the messenger who took their offerings to different deities. So Agni, the god Agni, was called Yajna-Vahaka, somebody who carries their prayers and their offerings to different deities. That is a Purohidam. So the first mantra, Rigveda, many of you recite, some of you at least, Agni-mele Purohidam. Purohida actually means somebody who walks in front of you, taking your offerings to different deities. So they used to utter these mantras, which means prayer for long life, prayer for the ability to hear, to see, to live, and to prosper. For Sharadashada means 100 autumnal seasons. That means let us be blessed with 100 years of life. So prayer for long life, prayer for prosperity, prayer for progeny, all these were natural among the Vedic ages during the early part of their evolution. But in Rigveda mantra, sometimes you find in many of these hymns, when they used to utter these hymns, putting offerings on burning fire, some of these mantras have got deep philosophical meaning also, which are clearly Advaitic or non-dualistic meaning you find. Some of you in the Bay Area, they chant this mantra, Aham Rastri Sangamani Vasunam Chigidushi Prathamaya Kiyanam Devi Sukta from Rigveda Samhita. What it means is the Vagambrini is the sage. So in these Vedic hymns, Vedic mantras, there will be a deity to whom this mantra is addressed. And there will be a sage or a saint. Sometimes these ladies, the Vagambrini was a Vedic sage, was a woman to whom this mantra was revealed. So there will be a rishi, there will be a chanda, a particular meter, Vedic meter. Trishtup, Anushtup, Gayatri, Savitri, these are different meters in which Vedic mantras were composed. And this Vedic mantra will be revealed to the saints and sages. So in this mantra you find this sage prayers. She has realized her own self as the Supreme Atman, and she has realized her identity and oneness with the whole creation. So many of these mantras were not literally composed. So that is a very important point we should keep in mind when we talk about Vedic culture. In fact, that is a major difference between the traditional Indian approach, the approach of traditional Pandits in India, and Western Indologists. Western Indologists frequently try to interpret these mantras as being composed by sages. But really speaking, these mantras were revealed. So what it could mean is, in their meditation, many of these ideas came to them. And as these ideas came to them, they recited. And when they recited, their disciples wrote down. So we should remember very well, there is a traditional principle in India, and that should be understood whenever we try to make a study of Vedas. That is, Vedas were considered to be apaurusheya. So apaurusheya means a book or verses which are revealed, not physically composed by a person verbatim, but revealed to them in their hearts in the process of their meditation. And again, it doesn't have a human origin. It is revealed in their hearts. So many of these mantras were revealed and they were composed later on by Vedic, by the sages. So you find the first attempt to study and understand Vedic mantras in India took place around 6th century BC, and the author of that effort was Yaska. He wrote a book called Niruktam. So Niruktam is the first attempt at writing a dictionary or a thesaurus. So what Yaska, the author of Niruktam, did was, he took several verses from Rigveda Samhita and he tried to interpret some of these names. So remember, there are close to 11,000 verses. He took just a few hundreds of verses. Niruktam is not a large book. Rigveda Samhita is quite huge. So Yaska, the author, he took a few verses, a few hundreds of verses from Rigveda, and he wrote a book more like a description and meaning together, like thesaurus. It is called Niruktam. So in the Nirukta, Yaska says, Sakshakrita dharmana rishayaha babhuvahu te asakshakrita dharmabhya upadeshaya glayanta mantran samprapuhu. I am just quoting a statement written by Yaska in the 6th century BC. What it means is, the great sages of India in ancient times, they realized the subtle truths of creation in their own hearts. And then, as they realized, they sang, which their disciples wrote. They realized, so that's why the word is Sakshakra Dharmana Rishayaka, means they realized this Dharma. So, one definition for Vedas is Sruyede Dharma Anena iti. Amnayade Sruyede Dharma Anena iti. So, Veda is something that teaches us, from which we hear about Dharma. Dharma means certain eternal principles that keep the world in balance, that sustains the world, that keeps the world in harmony. That's the real meaning of Dharma, Dhrudhadu Dharedi means something that preserves, supports, sustains. So the ancient sages, in their meditation, they realized some of these great truths, and as they realized, they sang, and as a result, these Vedas came into existence. But how do we understand in modern times? Let us say, if a person practices certain spiritual disciplines like non-violence, yamas and niyamas, as Patanjali put in later on, according to yoga, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, yamas and niyamas, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, parigraha, shaucha, sandosha, tapasya, adhyaya, sapanithana, which again Patanjali was trying to put in his own sutra form what ancient Vedic sages wrote about it and taught in early centuries. If a person practices some of these spiritual disciplines and practices meditation, then his mind will realize certain subtle spiritual truths. That knowledge doesn't come from books. That knowledge comes from within. So, the highest truth has to come from within. So, you find one great statement in Rigveda Samhita 10th Mandala is Sado Bandhum Asadi Niravindan Hridi Pratisha Kavayo Manisha. Those of you who have time, you can read Srishti Suktam, the 10th Mandala. It is called Creation Hymn. There, the Vedic sage tells you, I went in search of the mystery, of an explanation for the mystery of the universe. I searched outside everywhere. I could not find an answer to my questions. Finally, Hridi Pradeshya Kavayo Manisha. Finally, Kavaya means Rishaya, means Kavi means Mantradashtarha, those who realize the truth of mantras. It's called Kavi, also means poet. So these ancient Vedic sages, they found the answer to their question of the mystery of the universe. They found the answer within themselves. Hridi means Hridaya Guhaya, within their own hearts. They found an answer, an explanation to the deeper questions of life and existence. So, what it means is, this is the uniqueness of Vedas. When we say the Vedas were, by Vedas we don't mean books, but we mean that they form the accumulated wisdom of sages and saints who meditated and contemplated for a long time. So the Vedas tell you that if you meditate on a mantra or a sacred word symbol with a pure heart, you grow in an ascending order, and eventually you realize the truth of that mantra within your own heart. So that knowledge doesn't come from outside. That knowledge comes from the source of all knowledge, that is the Atman within yourself. That's why in later centuries in the Mantra Shastram, you find this Para, Pashuddhi, Madhyama, Vaikhari. There are 4 stages in our evolution of our understanding of sacred word symbols in all religious traditions. First, we may chant, we may recite a sacred word symbol loudly. That is at the first stage. It's called Vaikhari. And the later stage, we may do it in a more subtle manner without making a lot of noise. Just we hear ourselves, Vachikam. At another stage, it becomes purely mental, Pashyanti. Eventually, we realize the truth of this mantra, sacred word symbol, in our own heart. So, Vedas are records of great sages who realize the meaning and mystery of the universe in their own hearts. And they realize that there are 3 central principles, according to Vedas, that guide and regulate human life and existence. That is Satyam, Niruktam and Dharma. Satyam is truth, of course, we all know. Dharma, as I mentioned, is the expression of the Satyam, the truthfulness in our daily conduct, in such a way that our actions, our conduct do not disturb the inherent harmony of nature, external nature, and the harmony of our own inner nature, our mind. So when we live our life in close proximity with nature, and when we practice truthfulness in our life, then we are living according to the invisible principle of harmony and interrelatedness of nature. So that particular phenomenon was called Niruktam. So what is Niruktam? Niruktam means the invisible interrelatedness and harmony of cosmic existence, as explained in the scriptures. That is Niruktam. So our life should be lived in such a way that we do not disturb the rhythm, the inherent harmony in nature, and our interaction with others should be in a way to keep this harmony intact. Then we will enjoy harmony within ourselves. That is the meaning of Niruktam. And in fact, these 3 principles constitute some of the vital teachings of Rigveda Samhita, especially as interpreted by Sayanacharya, who lived sometime in 13th century, who wrote a commentary on all the 4 Vedas. Of course, that was a later attempt. The first attempt was done by Yaska in the 6th century BC, but that was only a very marginal attempt, in which in Yaska's Niruktam, he tried to give some rudimentary meaning of some of the words. For example, Deva Shabda. What is the meaning of Deva? Devo Danadva, Dyopanadva, Dyotanava, Dusthanova, Bhavatiti. This means Deva means somebody, God, angel means somebody who will listen to your prayer, who will help, who will bestow on you what you are praying for, and who will light the candle of knowledge within you, and so on. But Sayanacharya, who lived sometime in 13th century, he was a great scholar who wrote commentaries on all the Upanishads and Vedas, Vedic literature, Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Of course, Upanishads Bhashya closely Shankaracharya's Bhashya. He was a great follower of Shankaracharya. He belonged to the Shankara tradition. He lived during the time of Vijayanagara Empire. So what I mean to say, maybe the most central teachings which are relevant to our times that we can derive from Vedas is these three vital principles, central teachings. One is Satyam, Dharma and Niruktam. The more we move away from nature, from this harmonious interrelatedness that you find in nature, the more we will experience disharmony within ourselves. So what is the rhythm? See, for example, I mentioned this on many occasions earlier. If you cut down trees, there will be deforestation, there will be a change of climate, there will be less rain, there will be famine. If you pollute rivers and waters, if you pollute the air, if you pollute the earth, there will be consequences. Just we may not inherit those consequences, suffer those consequences, our next generation will suffer. So our life should be lived in such a way as to be in close harmony with nature. And that is our dharma, that's our duty. And that is the correct way of following the principle of truthfulness. So, of course, Rigveda Samhita contains many higher ideas. In fact, most of the fundamental principles of Vedanta philosophy, non-dualism, Advaita and Visishtadvaita, qualified non-dualism, Madhva system, dualism, and all other different systems of Indian philosophy have their base on Vedas. And when we say Vedas, means Rigveda Samhita is important, is the most important document because it is the most exhaustive, as I mentioned earlier. Most of the mantras in other Vedas can be found in Rigveda Samhita itself. And the last sukta is called Aigamatya Sukta, which means let the whole world be one, looking at the whole humanity as one spiritual family. It is the suktam, or is a song of unity and oneness. The spiritual unity, one and oneness of existence. Looking upon the whole humanity, not only humanity, the whole creation. And that's one unique aspect of Veda I want to repeat again. Vedas are, when we talk about harmony with nature, Vedas do not mean harmony with fellow human beings alone. Harmony and fellowship extend beyond fellow human beings. It extends to nature as a whole. The trees and mountains and valleys and all that you find included in the Vedic prayer, Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspadaya Shanti, you find all these prayers. Let there be peace and harmony in the higher regions, on earth, trees, herbs, mountains, valleys and rivers, everywhere. So you find the Vedic sages, they had a spiritual fellowship with not only fellow human beings, but also the entire creation. The whole cosmos was included in their spiritual fellowship. Many of the sukta, Hiranyagarbha Sukta, Saraswati Sukta, Imam Me Gange Yamune Saraswati Purushniya, you find these are names of rivers. But sometimes the names of these rivers were sometimes used as names of deities in Vedic times, you find. So, that is a mystery. One is extending the spiritual fellowship beyond humanity, embracing the entire creation, including external nature, including the space, the earth, the celestial regions, the trees and mountains and valleys, because they should be happy. Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Oshadaya Shanti, Vanaspadaya Shanti. Oshadaya Vanaspadaya means, trees and herbs, oceans. They all should be in harmony and peace. Then only our life will be in peace. So, this is a very unique text. Many Western Indologists, beginning with the early German Indologists, then later times, Max Muller, Paul Deussen, MacDonald, and now also there are many Western Indologists who are, of course, the interpretation is sometimes very literary. That's the main problem, because with Vedic, when you interpret and understand Vedas, you should also keep in mind the Vedic culture. Because if you do not try to interpret Vedic mantras, forgetting the cultural background of the Vedas, you may miss many of the deeper implications and meanings of Vedic statements. So, the message of the Vedas, the universal spiritual humanism, the universalism, looking upon the whole humanity, looking upon the whole creation as one spiritual family. We cannot sit in a corner and pray to our God and hate everyone else, and we cannot be happy. We cannot pollute the river and pray to God and lead a blessed life. It is impossible. You cannot do that. Keeping the nature. So you find Dyav Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi, Madhuvada Rudayade, Madhuksharandi Sindhavaga. You find, let all air, water, mountains, let them all bring sweetness to us, you find. Let it be in state of peace and tranquility. Because nature should be left to itself. Otherwise, nature will retaliate, and that's what we are finding today. So that is a different subject. So you are most welcome to ask questions. This is a very extensive topic. I have given many lectures related to the Vedas on YouTube. You can find in San Francisco's YouTube videos you find. You are most welcome to ask questions. Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar, Swamiji.
Namaskar, namaskar. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, two different questions.
Yeah.
So I'll start off with my first question. So when you're talking about these deities in the Rig Veda, so you said that initially there was the sense of talking about these elements of nature as deities.
Yeah.
So later, when someone like Shankara came and gave his interpretation of the Vedas, what did he make of the deities? What did he do of that? How did he explain the existence of that in the Vedas?
Thank you. Very profound and relevant question. So I shall approach the subject from two angles. One important point to remember is, analysis of this evolution of deities in Vedas was essentially a contribution of Western Indologists, primarily Max Muller. So, Rigveda Samhita doesn't follow this in a chronological manner. For example, some of the most profound statements of monism are found in the first mandala. In fact, Indramit Ekam Sat Vipra Bhagudha Vadanti is perhaps the most profound statement of non-dualism in Rig Veda. It comes in the first mandala, 164th sukta. Now, the last sukta of 10th mandala is Aigamatya sukta. Samgicchadum, Sambhadattum, Sambho Manamsi Janada, which is actually a call for spiritual unity and oneness, etc. Now, so we should remember, reading the Rig Veda, Western Indologists, as I mentioned, primarily Max Muller, studied traces of these pantheistic, pantheistic, polytheistic, and monotheistic and henotheistic and monistic trends in Rig Veda Samhita. So that was the analysis that he made, which has helped us, which has given a new possibility of approaching a new scholarly approach to Rig Veda Samhita. You don't find in an ascending order 1, 2, 3, first pantheism, then pantheism. You don't find like that. So that should be kept in mind. So it was a systematic analysis of different concepts of God that he found, at least he was employing, he found in Rigveda Samhita when he was employing Western methodology, okay, and hermeneutics. That is one. Second part of the question is even more important, relevant. Remember, Shankaracharya lived in the 8th century, 7th and 8th century AD. That was long after Yaska wrote his Niruktam, around 6th century BC. Between these, Mahidhara and others, some Mimamsakas and others also wrote some commentaries, but not complete. So the first exhaustive commentaries to all the Vedic literature were done by Sayana, who came 500 years after Shankara, 500 years after Shankara. Now, what Shankara did, and that deserves a special attention. You know what he did? He, in his head, organized all the powerful, profound teachings of the Vedas, and he put them in the form of Upanishads. We do not know if the Upanishads as a compact form existed before Shankara. And that is an important point, remember. There is no evidence that these Upanishads as a separate text existed as part of Vedic literatures, as a separate, as an integral, compact form of text existed, detached from the other branches of Vedas. So Shankaracharya, in his head, and head was fairly big and quite profound, as you know, the amount of work he did, he organized all this, and he was giving a philosophical, spiritual implication to many of the Vedic mantras. Some of the Vedic mantras which did not apparently have any philosophical implication, have any spiritual implication, were given a profound implication by Shankaracharya in his commentary. In other words, the fact is, if Shankara had not come and written commentaries on 10 Upanishads, we will have no philosophy of Vedas. We will have ritualism, we will have philology, we will have a lot of other things. But this edifice of Vedanta philosophy would not have existed if Shankara had not arrived and given a meaning to Veda mantras. I can see Tattwamasi. Tattwamasi was interpreted by Mimamsakas in a very ridiculous manner. Aham Brahmasmi was interpreted in a very ridiculous manner. Aham means the one who performed yajnas and yagas. Brahma means Devata. Asmi means Devata Prapti. So somebody who performs these external sacrifices, praying for wealth and prosperity, he praying to Indra, Varuna, Agni, he will get identity with Devata, with Indra, Agni, etc. That is the meaning of Brahmasmi. You read Shankaracharya's commentary of Brahmasmi in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is so profound, first Adhyaya. It is so profound, Tattwamasi. In 9 Brahmanas you find Shankara's interpretation. So you find Shankara, what he did, in his interpretation, he did not reject any of the deities mentioned in the Vedas. But he said, there is something beyond that. He did not condemn Mimamsakas who were performing yajnas and yagas, praying to these different deities, who were pouring offerings on burning fire. He said, there is something higher that you should aspire for. You don't find the word rejection in Shankara's vocabulary. He said you should transcend this. So, Advaita doesn't reject worshipping different deities. Advaita only goes beyond it. Another thing to remember, many of the Vedic deities later took different forms. See, for example, Vishnu was actually a younger brother of Indra in the Rigveda Samhita. But that Vishnu became Vyapnodi Vishnu. He became Sarvavyapi. He became all-pervading deity. So the word Vishnu was given etymological interpretation by Vyagaranas and other interpreters. So Vishnu became a great deity. He is in charge of preserving everything, So one of the trinities of Hinduism. So Soma, Rudra became Shiva. Rudra became Shiva. And see, Devi Sukta, you find Aham Rudre Birvasivishcharami, Durga Sukta is the Jadaveda says Sunavama Soma. All these Durga Suktam is there, Devi Suktam is there. You find Durga became a different deity during the Pauranic times, during the intervening 1500 years. There was a great transition from Vedas to Puranic age. So today's Hinduism is not exclusively Vedic, but its basis is Vedas. But remember, the way Tantras and Puranas, these are all based on Vedic teachings. They are based on Vedas. They accept Vedas as supreme authority, but you don't find that kind of nature worship. You don't find that kind of close affinity with nature. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, in the Krishna Yajurveda, there is a particular section. It's called Varuni Vidya. This a special kind of meditation is taught. It's called Bhargavi Vidya because it's taught by Varuna to his son Bhrigu. So there Bhrigu went to his father, please teach me Adhihi Bhagavo Brahmedi, please teach me the highest spiritual truth of Brahman. And you know what the father told him? You go and meditate. So you find Annam Pranam Chakshusotram Manovachamiti Yatova Imani Bhudani Jayande Yena Jatani Jivanti Yet Prayinda Visam Visanti Tad Vijijñasasva Tad Brahma. So Varuna doesn't ask Bhrigu to go to a temple and pray. He asked him to go to the forest and sit under a tree and meditate and contemplate and think from where all these matter, energy, senses, mind, or intellect, all these emerge. What sustains them? Towards what they get dissolved in the end. That is the original cause of the universe. You meditate and realize this. Tapasa Brahma Vijijñasasa, through meditation. So what is the means for realizing truth? Meditation. And where you meditate under a tree. Of course, you find in the Vedic literature, you find a lot of imageries. Imageries taken from forests, from trees, from mountains, and so on. I mentioned, Imamme Gange Yamune Saraswati, like that. There are many other mantras in the Mundagopanishad, which Mundagopanishad actually belongs to Atharvaveda, but many of the mantras are from Rigveda Samhita. So, Yeda Nadya Sendamana Samudri Astangachandi Namarupe Vikaya Tata Namarupa Nimatnaha Paratparam Purusham Uvaidi Divyam. Mundagopanishad, but it is in Rigveda Samhita. What it says, just like so many rivers, they flow to the ocean, towards the ocean. When the rivers merge with the ocean, when all the waters merge with the ocean, those rivers lose their individual identities. They become one with the ocean. Similarly, when we reach the highest spiritual experience, all these diversities and differences, in terms of different deities, different kinds of worship, all of them disappear. They all merge with the ocean of inner spiritual experience. So here also you find the imagery is taken from rivers, oceans. That's an interesting thing. Anyway, thank you for your question. I hope it's okay with you now. Right? Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji. So Swami, then the other question is that you were talking about the various stages of understanding the Rig Veda, starting from, say, pantheism based understanding, and then there's pantheism, polytheism, monotheism, and then Shankara's monism. And then later you mentioned just now that Shankara, all of this organizing happened in Shankara's head, and then Shankara gave us an organized view of the Vedas, but otherwise the verses were sprinkled across the Rig Veda. So, is it right in assuming that the Rig Veda does not take any of these positions of, say, pantheism or monism or monotheism?
Yeah, you are right. Rig Veda, we cannot say Rig Veda takes one side or other side. No. We cannot say that. So again, Shankaracharya was concerned only with the Upanishad portions, the Upanishad portions. He did not write a commentary on Rigveda Samhita mantras. Upanishads constitute the highest philosophical portions of Vedic literature. Brahmanas deal with rituals. Aranya deal also with different hymns and rituals. Samhitas are exclusively dedicated to different hymns addressed to different deities. But what Shankara did, he was concerned only with the most philosophical portions of the entire Vedic literature. But remember, that is something that should be kept in mind. Many of the mantras in Upanishads which traditionally belong to non-Rigveda are taken from Rigveda Samhita itself. So Samhita portions which are supposed to be dedicated to deities and prayers and rituals, those Samhitas themselves contain very profound mantras which later Shankara included in the Upanishads. So where do you draw the line? So the concept of classifying into watertight compartments and divisions which are characteristic of modern times, that did not exist in those days. So you have to think of that age. So many of the mantras which are very profound, which actually belong to Upanishads, can be found in Rigveda Samhita. They first appear in Rigveda Samhita. Many of the Upanishad mantras are Rigveda mantras. Even now what I call Dva Suparna Savija, it is from Mundaka Upanishad. It is from Rigveda Samhita itself. In fact, the most profound statement in the entire Vedic literature is Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. Truth is one, sages call it by different names. Now, that is found in Rigveda Samhita, not in Upanishad really. So, but the entire Upanishad deal with the subject. So we should be very careful. In modern times, we draw clear lines of demarcation. That was inconceivable in ancient times.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Swamiji, I had a question. Today, we all know that Veda Vyasa, he also was a big player in the Puranic literature.
Yeah.
And on top of that, that derivation from Rig Veda to Puranas, derivation from Rig Veda to the deep connection into, from, for instance, we say that Dharma, that is Yudhishthira, came from, Mitra Varuna, or, the Ashwins are Nakula and Sahadeva. Now, those kinds of serious derivations, is everything in terms of Hindu literature, for instance, including the Upanishads, they all derive from smaller concepts from the Rig Veda or various Vedas.
Yeah, one way or other is related to Rig Veda. But Vyasa, Vyasa, this is a very controversial subject and highly debated everywhere. We hear about Vyasa classifying the Vedas. Again, Vedas were much more ancient than Puranas, and Vyasa wrote Puranas. And you find Mahabharata is comparatively very modern. and Vyasa wrote Mahabharata also. So it's a bit confusing. So some of the modern historians and linguists, they say that Vyasa was not a single person. It was a lineage of sages or saints or scholars, saintly scholars, who wrote in one family or one lineage, several Vyasas appeared in the same lineage, so there were different Vyasas, so that is one view. But remember, Vedas constitute the supreme authority in all matters of Hindu Vedantic tradition, not only in philosophical or spiritual matters, but even cultural matters. When there is a when there is a conflict between the opinions of Smritis and Puranas and Vedas, the authors of Puranas themselves declare Veda should be taken as the final authority, as the only authority. That's a very important point. Sudhi Smriti Puraneshu Sudhireva Gariyasi Avirodetu Sadakaryam Smartam Vaidika Sada. Vyasaran Vyasa Smriti, what he says, whenever there is a conflict between what the Vedas say on a subject, it may be a cultural subject, it will be a philosophical topic, it should be a conventional ritual, whatever it is. It may have something to do with how you should conduct your ritual in your home. The final and ultimate authority is a statement from the Vedas. When the statements from the Puranas do not run contrary to what the Vedas say, then only Puranas do have an authority. Vedas constitute the final and ultimate supreme authority. Excuse me, what is your name? You are... Okay, the questioner?
I am Srinivasan.
Yes, Srinivasan. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Srinivasan.
So this is an important point, remember. We have a tradition that in all matters of religion, philosophy, rituals, conventions, beliefs, Vedas constitute ultimate and central authority. Vedas are so democratic, that's the only term we can use, and so harmonious and so universal. See, Vedic values from Rig Veda, they are so universal. So remember, Vedas flourished long before what we now understand in Hinduism came into existence. Vedas constitute the foundation, the genesis. But remember, Vedas in the Vedic tradition, you don't find just a description of our journey in search of higher ideas, higher knowledge, higher realizations. It's a story of human quest for truth. That's why you find many modern scholars have seen this close connection between the teachings of the Vedas and also Zoroastrian religion, pre-Christian European religious traditions like pagan religious traditions, where they used to revere nature. They used to, because they did not believe that God created the world for human beings to enjoy at the cost of non-human beings. We have to live in close harmony and friendship and affinity with the whole creation. So that idea you find in the Vedas, especially Rig Veda Samhita. They don't sow a line, we are all highly civilized people with a lot of technology. We can make use of all that nature has got for our own comforts. That idea you don't find in the Rig Veda Samhita. It's so universal. You may call it primitive, but there is a spiritual depth to that primitive nature. There is an inherent spirituality in the approach of Vedas. And it embraces the whole humanity, the whole creation. That's why Max Muller and other Indologists were fascinated, because there is pantheism, equating nature with the divine, there is magnetism, there is divine principle within different natural phenomena. There is politism, there is a divine hand behind everything. There is a monotheism, there is a supreme deity presiding over everything. And of course, there is a transcendental spiritual principle, monism or Advaita. So all they found. So Western Indologists, they were trying to look for things that they were familiar with, and they found everything there. So you find, if you read in modern times, if you read Thoreau's Walden, you find this man going in search, and he was living close affinity with nature, moving from place to place, enjoying the mountains and valleys and trees and forests. You find, and he perhaps a full translation of Rig Veda was not available, but he said he got a portion with translations, and he was highly fascinated, because there you find how human beings can be friends with nature, we can be friends with trees and mountains. It's a collective existence, of cosmic existence. So that is the uniqueness of Rig Veda Samhita. Rig Veda is important because it is the first human document. It's also the most exhaustive Vedic portion. That's all. Thank you for those questions, and these questions are very helpful for me to explain things that I would have left out in my talk. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Rama Krishna Arpanamastu.